I wanted to start this morning out. First of all, welcome. So much into my head is like, wait a minute, where are you? Yeah, thank you for coming this morning and thank you for tuning in. It's always nice to know that we have so many people outside of this state that are tuning in to the teaching. You know, it gives me courage and confidence in our future. This morning I'm going to be talking about traps and problems on the spiritual path. So this reading is taken from the book The Art of Teaching. And this is what Torkim, the author, has to say. He says, whenever we are involved with problems, we are in a crisis. To have a crisis means to have an opportunity, but to also be in danger. He writes, an opportunity means that in a problem and in a difficulty, you have a chance to prove your spiritual superiority over your obstacles, and with right usage of thought, to solve them. Danger comes in when, instead of seeing the situation in the spirit of righteousness, cool reason, love, and gratitude, you begin to increase your karma through antagonistic, hateful, revengeful thoughts, through negative imagination, fabrication, and jealousy, and through actions that are dishonest and harmful and destructive. He says these are the dangers. And if you increase your karma, in the future, you will face worse situations than in the present. So we come back again to our true self, meet ourself in meditation, and decide to use our mind, emotions, words, and actions in the right way, in harmlessness, in constructive actions, thoughts, and words. This is the fruit of the opportunity. He says, how can karma be overcome? And there are 4 points. The first point, he says, karma can be overcome by not adding to it. Exactly. The second is by learning its subtle lessons. The third is by living a harmless life. And the fourth is by increasing our good thoughts, good words, and good actions. He says these are the fruits of the tree of meditation. So are you ready? Okay. Few people realize that stepping onto a spiritual path will ultimately mean they are going to encounter traps and problems. That statement by itself is so profound. See, because traditional religion tells us just the opposite. You know, traditional religion says, you know, your life is going to improve. It will get better. You will be saved. When you're saved, you have no more worries, and so forth. But the esoteric tradition, which is the tradition of the most ancient of the truth and the most ancient of ageless wisdom, says just the opposite of that. And so where it seems like a mystery, by the time I get to the end of the talk this morning, it's going to make more sense. And it's going to, I hope, clarify for you why your life is confronted with obstacles and challenges and difficult situations. But this first sentence is something we need to remember, that stepping onto a spiritual path ultimately means that we're going to be encountering traps and problems. In fact, this is what happens. The reason that we encounter these traps and problems is it has to do with the increase and release of our soul light. And the increase of fiery energies. The increase of our soul light and fiery energies asks us what? See, it's asking something from us. It is like when you move on to the spiritual path, your life changes. Typically, when we move on to a spiritual path, it's not because life is so wonderful, so easy, so beautiful, that now we really want to get it together. It's just the opposite. It's like our life is in such turmoil, such chaos, such mystery, and something in that whole process begins to release light from our soul and releases a fiery energy. And what happens when this light and fiery energy is slowly released, there is an urge. And this urge is, okay, my life may be problematic or my life may be okay, but there's something else here for me on this planet to learn from and to become. It's like there's this yearning, and I'm sure most of you have experienced it. From the time you were a child, you began looking for something specific to explain the purpose of life. Then you began to look for something specific that defined what your life was supposed to be all about. You may not have used the word plan or the word purpose, but there's this, through the process of this light and the process of a release of spiritual, or what we call in the teaching fiery energy, it eventually gave you a direction that caused your sense of and desire to seek the meaning of life more deeply, and you could not any longer waver from that path. So you became dedicated to the light of your soul. You became dedicated to the spiritual path. So in this process of the releasing of the light of your soul and the expression of fiery energy, now you may not have the vision or the purpose of your life right in front of you yet, but you're beginning to respond to this inner guidance. You begin to rely more and more on the inner guidance than in psychological books or religious books or people that are out there that may be well-meaning that are trying to govern your life. But the soul light is stronger than psychology and philosophy and religious tradition and the people we love that care about us but don't know how to direct us to further follow and deepen the meaning of the light of our soul. So this is what happens is once we become aware of this inner guidance, and then we begin to listen to it. And that inner guidance begins to tell us, don't do this, go forward, don't turn left, don't turn around and go backwards. Now, this inner guidance is what we call the solar angel. Now, the solar angel has our attention. It's grabbed our attention. And it says, okay, she or he is listening to me now. Now, karma is going to be presented to us. See, these traps and obstacles are going to be presented to us so that we can begin to not have to walk through this mud and chaos and craziness any longer, because the walking through the mud and the craziness and chaos is in fact meeting ourselves in past lifetimes. Things that we created from one incarnation to another, to another, to another. And until we've reached the point where we're on this path and the light of the soul is released and we finally are listening to the guidance of the solar angel. See, it's at this point we become frustrated with ourselves. We're trying to move forward, but it just doesn't seem to be happening because of the traps and the problems. So this is a critical point in the life of the disciple, where oftentimes the traps and the problems stop them from moving ahead, stop them from listening to the inner guidance, stop them from trying to solve the problems. And then they take on more karma, as I was reading, in the introductory quote. So, the talk this morning is going to, if you find yourself wavering from the path, if you find yourself in self-doubt, if you find yourself in depression, the talk this morning, I'm hoping, will lift you out of the quagmire and walking through the muddy waters and losing your way and being stuck. So this is the direction, this is from the teaching, that will hopefully, kick your proverbial back into gear and you're going to start running ahead and no longer losing time. The increase of our soul light and fiery energy asks us, as seekers, to undergo certain changes. And the word in our language is transformation. Change means transformation. That our personality is going to undergo specific and succinct and expansive changes or transformation. This transformation is possible because of the release of light from our soul. That light comes from higher sources, higher spheres of consciousness, of those not only our solar angel, but the master, one who has been watching you for many, many incarnations. So transformation is that process of bringing in more powerful energy, more powerful light, more powerful wisdom in order to allow these changes in your personality to occur. The purpose of such traps and problems is the payment of karmic debts that were incurred in previous lifetimes. So when you ask yourself, why me? Because it's because of me. It's because of me. These debts must be paid to release our soul into the future without old debts. So this is the whole point of today's talk, is to realize that it is a gift first of all, to have found the path. Secondly, to recognize that the release of light from our soul is a great honor, and that confronting these traps and problems is the result and the opportunity to get rid of the old debts, aka traps and problems, that we keep dragging with us from one lifetime to another, to another, to another. We want to pay these old debts. The traps that are found on the path of the striving person are essentially four in number. The first is our physical problems. The second is our involvement with hatred and jealousy and revenge. The third is vanity. This is the third trap: vanity, ego, superiority, and psychic attacks. And the fourth is spiritual selfishness. So these are the four basic traps and problems that we're going to encounter when we're on the spiritual path. Okay? As we begin to depart from our physical interests and enter into the ocean of emotions and try then to later use the fire of the mind, we begin to experience problems and dangers that follow our steps. On each level of progress, what's going to happen? Our powers are going to be tested. Our powers are going to be tested. Our honesty is going to be tested. And now we are going to be forced to pay our karma and to move on. So what are our powers? You know, I really don't have time this morning to get into these powers, but I can tell specifically, share specifically. It has to do with our being able to listen to the guidance of our solar angel. And eventually, through practiced meditation, it's like a door opens or a portal to a higher level of consciousness opens, and intuition. Every once in a while, we have an intuitive sense of, okay, now I know what I must do. And that I know now what I must do, behind it comes an army of protection, an army of security, an army that is going to direct your steps in such a way that you're going to be very successful. Successful in paying this old karmic debt. Okay? Okay. One of the problems is that an aspirant or disciple becomes extremely sensitive in his solar plexus. Now, I talked about a little bit about this last couple of Sundays, actually. Like a sponge, we begin to draw our negative and positive emotions. The negativity, the negative emotions, and the positive emotions of people who are around and about us. And what happens is then we find ourselves in a turmoil. And being in this turmoil means that the astral layer of our subconscious mind has released or let loose all your suppressed emotions and all your associations with your suppressed emotions. But this can only happen once the solar plexus becomes sensitive. Now, if you are in the Wednesday night class and you were part of our webinar Wednesday night, you saw that diagram and you saw the process as the sensitivity of the solar plexus increases. the web between the solar plexus and the heart center begins to dissolve, right? Okay, that's when our sensitivity increases. What is happening is the debris that comes from past incarnations and has been stored through your permanent atoms are released. Okay, they're released. And then we find ourselves caught in fear and anger and hatred. And all the triggers that trigger fear and anger and hatred. These three emotions lead us to jealousy and then to slander. So this is some of the major traps on the path. Once a person is caught in this dark network, there will be long delays in his evolution. So we have to be on our toes, on our feet. We have to be aware. We have to be conscious. And we must, as much as possible, have the image of the Master in our mind. So when we find ourselves confronting a test or a problem, that we recognize that this is an old karmic debt that has been stored in the subconscious, in the permanent atoms, that is now asking to be paid. How does hatred happen? We're going to find ourselves worshiping certain people, focusing on certain people. We really worship them. We really devote ourselves to them, our teachers, our guides, even certain philosophies and psychologies, and other objects we really, really, really love. Our co-workers we really, really, really love. But as intense as that is, we're also going to find we're going to hate certain people according to the change of our mood and vanity. Such people look for the sources of these kind of problems outside of themselves. That person did that to me. Shame on them. Air quote. See, we're looking for the source of the problem out there instead of recognizing it's inside. It is like, I was listening to NPR recently. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of this author, but he found himself in the early 1990s in a severe depression. He lived in London. His mom became very ill, who lived in the United States. And so he moved to the States to be with his mom and to help her in her process of the illness. Well, she ultimately died. And at the same time, his long-term in-love relationship walked away from him. Okay, he said the following year, like 1993 and 94, he got through these 2 years just fine. No problem, he was functioning okay. And then all of a sudden, he began to realize that he was isolating himself from the rest of the world. And he began to also recognize that his thoughts that were directing him and controlling him about himself were extremely negative. And then he realized, I'm in a depression. So he went through a few years of trying to figure out if it was a chemical depression or a psychological depression. And he said he was fortunate that he had some really good resources, medical resources. And they put him on some medication. But ultimately, he was able to remove himself from therapy and from medication when he realized that this depression was the result of the enemies in his mind, in his thinking, that were convincing him He had no hope left for his future. He was not worthy of this, and all the guilt. Anyway, he said that, and it made such an impression on me because it's very much part of this morning's talk, which I probably am not going to get to the whole of it. But anyway, I was thinking of Torkim wrote a whole book on thought and the glory of thinking. You know, you read through, this is like a 400, 500 page book. If you haven't studied that book, then you're not going to know what I'm talking about this morning. But this man, without reading anything, all of a sudden discovered the whole issue that had caused him to be depressed and to stop moving forward in his life was all those enemies in his mind that were keeping him depressed and from moving ahead. Such people, I'm going to repeat what I said, such people look for the sources of their trouble outside of themselves and hate to look within themselves. And he looked within. And he healed himself of a severe depression. If we want to know who our enemies are, we must search our hearts and discover the people we hated and hurt and lied about and slandered. Listen to this carefully, their images are our enemies within us. Even if outwardly the person knows nothing about our harmful actions toward them. People who are trapped in the lower strata of the astral plane live how? By judging others. By totally fighting within themselves. They discover that all the negative and ugly things they saw in others have stuck to them like glue. Such as this author that I heard this morning on NPR said I couldn't shake them off. Even though I could hear all this negative thinking talking to me day in and day out and in my dreams, I couldn't shake them off. See, he should have been here this morning to listen to the teaching. All the negative and ugly things we see in others have stuck to us like glue. The path out of such a dead-end street is to look inside of ourselves and to discover our enemies. The more we search for our enemies in others, the more enemies, listen to this, the more enemies we are going to create within ourselves. See that? This is the teaching. That it is possible that in this state of thinking, we build certain relationships with those dark entities that are destructive. And we have invited them to live within us. And of course, if this happens, it will create a very bad situation in our life. Most people who slander others are possessed by dark entities. And such people pay a very high price for their slander. If you have ever been slandered, and I have seriously slandered, what the heck? You know, their slander is so outrageously filled with lies and wrong images and convoluted stories that I didn't even recognize myself. What? And I wish I could remember the title of this book. I can't. But there is a book written by a student who studied Nicholas Roerch's life. It's an absolutely incredible book. And the majority of the book is about all the different stories of slander against this incredible master artist. They never met the man. and got to know the depth of who this great, powerful person was. But see, something triggered the darkness in their own subconscious mind. They looked at him as the cause and began the slander. Well, the cause was within them. They were obsessed by dark entities. And it was those dark entities that tried to prevent people from seeing his greatness. And so he was slandered. If we pass through such traps and problems by practicing compassion and love and forgiveness and clear thinking, which it can all be helped by your teacher, which of course requires listening and following the advice of the teacher. But if the student or the disciple or aspirant has humility and a willingness to listen to the voice of the teacher, he is going to pass through such traps and problems and step into the lower strata of his mental plane. So if you take this example of Nicholas Rourke, we published a terrific book called, what was it called? Meeting of the Masters. In there, there's amazing stories about Nicholas Rourke's challenges and how his teachers helped him through it so that it didn't stop him, see, on his travel to meet the self, his true self. The lower strata of the mental plane, the subconscious mind, is a storage of all of our experiences of the past. It's both full of good things and things according to what we did in the past. The worst memories which pop up from our lower mind are the memories of days in which we hurt people physically, emotionally, and mentally with our deeds, emotions, words, and thoughts. All these memories will come and make the person's life miserable. So if you're in a difficult marriage, think about this. If you have been divorced and you're still harboring grudges and anxiety and negative thinking about your ex, think about what the teaching is telling us today. These memories will come and make our life miserable. So this is what we can do to confront this situation. First, we're going to dedicate our life to the principles of that we're also familiar with, very familiar with: beauty, goodness, righteousness, joy, freedom, striving, and service. Think of these 7 principles in relationship to your ex-spouse. Next, build a wall around your consciousness, a wall around your what? A wall around your self-justification, your rationalizations, and self-deception. This is a pit that people fall into and will need a teacher to help bring him or her out if that person has good karma left in their chalice. Another way to confront this situation is to develop ego and vanity and to lose several lives, creating a mess in your karma. Vanity and ego lead us to separatism and to organized attacks on those toward whom we have jealousy or envy. This is another jungle from which we can come out of with the help of a teacher. But my experience is to have a teacher help you requires humility and vulnerability and trust. Typically, people trust their ego and vanity more than the intuition and stream of higher energy coming through from and through the teacher to your soul. And instead, we place our confidence in our ego and vanity. So this is why I'm saying, and I know this because I've had to go through it, is to be vulnerable and to have a good dosage of humility before you go to the advice of the teacher. If we are lucky enough to train our lower mind and enter into our higher mind, the first thing we are going to do are these 3 points. We're going to organize a path of service. See, now we have purpose. Service gives us a sense of purpose. It takes us out of self-centered thinking, and now we're thinking of others. 2, we dedicate ourselves to the teaching. And 3, we spread the spirit of responsibility, cooperation, and gratitude. I was thinking, this is a little simple example, but this morning it was still dark in the house, and I went into the living room to turn on my special little light. It only has 1 lumen. In other words, you can't make it brighter and brighter and brighter, just 1 little click and it's on. Well, my granddaughter yesterday tried to turn it on, couldn't figure it out. What happened is this morning when I went up to, there's nothing to turn on. No switch, no little doohickey. What the heck? And so I remembered that she was going to go over and turn on the light, and she never did. And then I saw this little doohickey, which was the knob to turn on the light. But I was so tickled because she didn't throw the little doohickey away. She left it right there on the buffet. And so when I see her next weekend, my plan is to talk to her about responsibility. She could have easily just come say, Grandma Jolene, look what's happened, I can't turn on the light. So she was 50% there, she left the little doohickey. So this is, what we want to do is not to spread punishment, to spread the spirit of responsibility, cooperation, and gratitude. It is at this stage we begin to be creative and move ahead into greater responsibilities and increasing problems. We will spend our life in helping people through our creativity. Strangely enough, as we devote more energy and time to serving and illuminating people, more people are going to try to attack us. But if we are enlightened, we will see that these attackers are representative of a few enemies that we have in our mental sphere, created by our past mistakes, errors, hatred, and separatism. All these inner enemies find victims and through them attack us. This means that our outside attackers are victims of their own, of the enemies existing within ourselves. This is why we're admonished not to hate our enemy. The only attacker is only the attacker is only a victim, and the attacker is us, is me, is you. Thus, to lead people, to enlighten people, is not an easy path. The more the disciple or aspirant tries to enlighten people, the more he opens up a box of worms. This is why in all ages not a single teacher escaped dark attacks. Most of them were harmed in various ways, and history has proven this. But this is also their victory. The great works done by teachers are measured by the measure of the hatred of people, by the measure of their suffering, and also by the measure of their love. The teaching says that such conditions are necessary to release still higher beauty, that these conditions are necessary to release still higher beauty and glory that is hidden within us, within them. And I'm going to end there. I have about lots more things to share, but we're out of time. So we can talk about it, another time. Maybe we have time for a question. Do you have a question? Somebody have a question? Is that your hand, Diana? Carol.
I'm just trying to understand how great ones like Christ, have the enemies.
Yeah, but we're talking about ourselves. We're not.
Okay.
At this point, we're not qualified to think about Christ. They're so beyond. Their enemies are going to come from planet Zebra. Okay.
The people who slander us, how do we treat them? They're not, we don't want to take revenge on them. We want to see them as victims. But at the same time, do we let them back into our life? Do we try to bridge?
Well, the Agni Yoga teaching, first of all, tells us to smile at your enemies. When a slanderer, for example, comes, across your threshold, like, coming into your sanctuary, you smile at them, and you hope at some point they'll awaken. What I've learned by people who have slandered me is that I try not to react, but I also don't prostrate myself in front of them and act as if nothing is happening. When we think about the slanderers of their works that would take them to court and sue them, and oftentimes would win, they didn't say, I'll just let it all go. They did defend themselves factually. So even though they didn't win in some cases these lawsuits, they showed their integrity by, witnesses, their co-workers, their friends, speaking up for them. This gives the slanderer the opportunity to forgive. Say, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this about you. I didn't realize that was true. Does that answer?
Mm-hmm.
Any other question? It's a lot to mull over, isn't it?